Ba weep, Granagh weep, Nini Bong! Welcome back to Transformers AutoBook Club, a weekly podcast and video series where we read and deep dive into one issue or story per week from Marvel's Transformers comics. Usually here at the start of the show, I like to go over any Transformers news that I'm interested in personally from the week, but there wasn't really any from me this week. I do have some really good news on a personal note though, and since it's kind of popped up now and then throughout the show, I thought I'd mention it here. And also just because I'm so relieved to have this happen that I'm excited to talk about it. I've lived in Japan for 11 years now. And after you lived in Japan for 10 years, you are able to apply for permanent residence, which means you can stay forever. And your visa, your residence in Japan isn't tied to your job, which for me currently it is. In England, before I came here, I was a preschool teacher for 6 years. And in Japan, I've been doing it for 11 years. So 17 years total, I've been a preschool teacher. Because I love it. I genuinely love my work. But the thing about having a full-time job here in Japan and my residence depending on that means I haven't been able to take a break for 10 years. I haven't been able to travel anywhere really. I haven't gone back to England for any long stretch of time. I just always have to have a full-time job. I can't take any breaks. But I have heard from a scrivener/lawyer, I can apply for permanent residence before the new proposed changes from the new Prime Minister take effect, which would bar me from doing that. So really it's like, Indiana Jones sliding under that descending door. I just squeaked in by the skin of my teeth. It makes the next however many years of my life just so much simpler. And I think I've been carrying the stress of that around for months. So I feel like there's a big weight off. And though it's not set yet, I have my hopes in the right place. I'm not in the clear yet. I still have to go through all this process and I still have to get all these checks done, submit all the documents, and that all has to go through, without a problem. But I can apply. It's not off the table. So that's a big relief for me. Big enough that I wanted to share it here with you because I've kind of mentioned it here and there during the show. I have plans for the future. I have things I want to do that I just have to wait to do. And I still do have to wait. But waiting after that application has been submitted is going to be so much easier than waiting to finally submit that application. So yeah, that's a big weight off my shoulders. Besides that though, there's nothing new. This episode is going to be a really short one. It's only a 12-page or so comic. And this issue, man... This week's episode is a Christmas story, it's really poor timing for us here in the real world. This episode is going out April 1st, it should be, 2026. The reason I didn't want to skip this Christmas story and then cover it in December this year is that it kind of only really fits here and now. The events of this story are connected to what we've just read. It's about Circuit Breaker, who, when I checked for Christmas stories in December, was a character I didn't really know yet and who hadn't appeared in the comics that we'd read at that point, so I didn't want to use it then. I assume Circuit Breaker is going to be a recurring character, so I have no idea if I throw this out in December if she and her origin story are going to be easy enough to remember, that far in the future. So it's really best to just include this now. But I really had fun reading this one because it's so goofy and so many baffling decisions are made. So what I feel like I want to do is read it now and then bring it back for Christmas 2026. And reread it with a guest, possibly over several glasses of mulled wine, because I think this one, in particular, would be hilarious to read, A, as someone who has read it with somebody who hasn't read it, and B, while tipsy and toasty. This is easily my favorite, quote, bad story in these comics so far. Man of Iron and its bizarre dream, or not, sequence, and its seemingly strange story change midway was pretty weird. And Raiders of the Last Ark wasn't my favorite, mainly only because the rules about what Auntie even is or was were never clear, and then she died from having Ravage jump into her mouth. This story has some totally needless and inexplicable choices made by several characters, and a dramatic rescue scene which made me burst out laughing on a morning commuter train in Tokyo. So let's get started. First up, there's the cover. I actually really like this one. It's like a Christmassy cover. There's Prime wearing a Santa Claus jacket with a hood, and he's kind of taken off a Santa beard that he had been wearing on his face. It's a really cute one. The coloring's really nice on his helmet. It looks very, very shiny. So the shape is a little bit weird. It looks a bit strange, but yeah, it's a really nice picture. I think when it comes around to December again, I'll use this for my phone wallpaper. On the first page, at the top, is the title in like a gothic font in red for Christmas Break. And then in black there at the end, there's an ER that's been added. So it's Christmas BreakER. This page is a close-up of a hand holding a newspaper. And we can tell from the circuitry on the hand that it's Circuit Breaker, wearing a green coat. And it's a good job too, because it's snowing in this panel as well. The newspaper reports on Ferdy and Gabe's slavery at the hands of Shockwave. And there's a photo of them both there on the front page, which is really cool. We've kind of followed these two from before Shockwave took the plant. So they've had their own mini story arc. But in the photo, they don't actually look very happy to be having their photo taken. Their faces look really hostile, and one of them seems to be like reaching toward the camera like he's going to push it out of their faces. The headline says, "Held hostage by alien robots. Freed workers tell their story. Robot war on Earth?" Circuit Breaker is furious, and she yells to herself, "Damn robots!" And she laments that innocent bystanders seem to have been constantly dragged into the Transformers civil war. At the bottom are the credits, script by James Hill. And I thought, when I wrote my notes, that this was James Hill's debut, but actually it's not. He wrote the short story State Games, which is like really seminal and informed a lot of lore that came afterwards. It's almost the same as the Transformers Aligned continuity novels, which I've read a bit of. And the beginning is very much the same as that. And knowing that makes this issue all the weirder, because the first time I read this, before I had looked into the credits and everything, it was so funny to me. I thought this was hilarious, and I thought, like, I can't wait for this person to write some more. I want to see what other bonkers stuff they do. It turns out he's written something really important to Transformers lore, and really good, like genuinely really good. You'll see as we get going. Just, this is so bonkers. So yeah, I don't mean to sound too derisory, but I look forward to seeing what other stuff in the comics James Hill does, because this story is just so out there. Art by another new name this time, William Simpson. Letters by Starkings, we've seen them before. Colors by Hart, who we've also seen before. And the editor was Rimmer. For some reason, the last three don't get their first names included. After that, we go back to a third-person perspective over the page, and we can see Circuit Breaker wearing a green trench coat and a matching green floppy hat with a purple brim. It's a bold look. We've had some cool fashion from the 80s in these comics, but this is a strange outfit. She continues talking angrily to the Transformers who are not there, so kind of to herself out loud, really. And she comments that they weren't content to just destroy each other. They had to bring their conflict to Earth, which endangered human lives too. And she imagines what things were like when the Decepticons invaded the aerospace engineering plant. Though, I don't know why she's imagining this. She was aboard the oil rig when it was taken over, so she's been present. She knows about Shockwave. She's seen him. Anyway, in her imagination, she thinks about Soundwave. And I could be mistaken, but as far as I can remember, she's never actually seen Soundwave, right? But she imagines him anyway. Let's say she saw him on the news or something. But in her imagination, Soundwave gets this really cool, monstrous form with drill bits for fingers and like a hinged metal jaw with jagged teeth. She imagines him storming through the plant, blasting things with a strange-looking gun, with Laserbeak flying along with him, laser-beaking stuff. Jets are exploding, and workers are laying on the ground or running away screaming. She says that the Decepticons stripped the workers of their humanity and forced them to run away like mice. Like, come on, Circuit Breaker, that's so melodramatic. Stripped them of their humanity. Well, if anyone knows about stripping in this comic, more on that later though, because Circuit Breaker wonders what would have happened to the workers after the Decepticons were done with them, had their plans not been disrupted. And she imagines Soundwave slowly approaching and reaching for one of the workers. And then we see her again in the last space on the page, and the coat she was wearing, along with her hat, is open, with just her, like, metallic, circuitry strips underneath. So she's had the idea that maybe to stay warm in the snow, she should wear a coat. But she didn't go as far as putting clothes on under the coat. She doesn't even have shoes, either, just those, like, metal feet coverings from before. So, I mean, the coat is more covering up her costume than actually keeping her warm. Or it would be, if it were closed. Wearing it open like this just makes it kind of fail at the only two things that a coat would even be useful for. She speculates aloud to herself that the workers would have been killed, wouldn't they? And she says, "Killed?" again. This time it has a red outline, and in her anger, she seems to set the newspaper she was reading on fire and throw it in the trash, which is a definite fire risk. But she doesn't care, she's furious. A sign next to the trash can says, "Take pride in your town. Keep St. Petersburg tidy." That's an important detail to remember for later. Her flashback continues, and she realizes that Shockwave would have killed her. I mean, maybe? He actually didn't directly attack her at all. She just happened to be, unfortunately, close to some electronics, which were shocked as a result of his actions. So actually, we're seeing this from her perspective for the first time. And perhaps this is how she feels about it. She thinks she was intentionally targeted by that. She thinks back to Shockwave's attack on the rig, and calls it a calculated act of destruction. She recalls being in the computer room when the rig was hit with energy beams from Shockwave in his gun mode. She says she was caught in the resulting chain reaction, and in the artwork she recalls being thrown, contorted in the air, and shocked. And she's not far wrong there. The accident was pretty brutal, and it really looked like she had been killed for just a second when it happened. She remembers waking up, paralyzed in hospital, and then adds, a cripple, which I'm not sure we say that anymore, CB. But one, this was the 80s, and two, she's kind of using it to portray herself as a victim. But she decided that she wouldn't let being paralyzed stop her. Using her computer skills, she overcame it by creating a circuitry which she now wears, which replicates the functions of her damaged nervous system. It's just the angle, but she has an extraordinarily pointed face in this one panel, and she looks like an evil elf or something. And then she remembers her reveal, in more than one sense of the word, of herself to GB Blackrock. We see her from behind, and her hair is kind of orange-coloured, and she looks a bit like David Bowie. She says she has made the circuitry into a costume, which Blackrock tried to stop her from using for revenge. Revenge on all Transformers! And we don't need to go over again now how nonsensical this is. This entire revenge obsession just makes no sense to me. The last shot is of her looking completely unhinged down in the corner. It's all in profile, so we can only see one of her eyes, but the pupil is small. Her fists are raised and clenched next to her face, and she's grimacing. She looks quite scary. She finishes off her reminiscing with, "Do you hear me, robots? I was crippled in your senseless war." Which is rich. You know nothing about the war, and have a pretty senseless hate for all robots by yourself, lady. Anyway, she says, "For that, I'm going to kill you all!" But it's Christmas, remember? In the arc, Prime, Huffer, Bumblebee, Buster, Prowl, and Bluestreak are decorating. Prime is wearing a huge Santa jacket and belt, so not only is it on the cover, it's actually in this issue too. And the Santa jacket there has a hood, which he has up. Who knows where on earth they got one of those big enough for him, but it's Christmas, somebody did it. Huffer seems to have built a chair that's on a mobile, movable arm, so he's sitting on that to reach the tree that they're kind of making in the corner there. And Bumblebee is telling him to hang a decoration, which he calls a component. Prowl mutters that he can't believe Prime agreed to take part in all of this, within, like, inches of Prime, who's right in front of his face. Bluestreak tells him to shh, but Prowl is really bothered by Prime's behavior. The Decepticons are currently leaderless, and now is the perfect time for them to strike, not to be messing around with pieces of scrap metal. Bluestreak corrects him and says that he thinks Buster called it a Christmas tree. I kind of love Prowl's reaction. He says, "What in Cybertron's name is that? We're at war, Bluestreak." Which is a fair point, really. But you can't be in tactical mode all the time, right? Bluestreak says that Prime really ought to indulge Buster, since the Autobots owe so much to him for his part in rescuing Prime. Prowl relents and says he supposes that he's right. But Prime has been acting strangely recently, and he suspects something is bothering him, which, yeah, as readers we know a lot about Prime's mental state because he told us multiple times when he was stuck in the Decepticon base without a body, that he feels and accepts responsibility for everything that had happened as a result of his hiding the matrix of creation in Buster's mind. And more broadly, for having brought the Transformers war to Earth in the first place. He's burdened by a lot of guilt. Buster says that Huffer's hover platform is really handy. He can get up close to the tree, which he says looks great from there. We couldn't see it clearly from the first panel, but in the last one you can see it's kind of not a regular tree. It's made up of green metallic pipes, and the ornaments look like brightly coloured hunks of glowing rock. Jazz is very diplomatic in his approach to gently confronting Buster. He compliments the tree, calling it a fine construction, but asking, what does it do? Buster says that it doesn't do anything, it's just symbolic of charity, and Jazz finds that confusing. Humans talk about charity, but just look at Circuit Breaker. She has so much power that she could use to help so many people, which, yeah, that's a good point, that's true. I hadn't even stopped to think about how revolutionary her suit is. She could be helping thousands of people who have mobility issues, and probably make a pretty penny from doing that. But Jazz says, despite all that, she's only interested in destruction. Buster, who doesn't know about Circuit Breaker yet, asks about her. Isn't she the woman that you fought at the Speedway? Jazz confirms, yes, at the event where GB Blackrock had intended to show his Transformers killing weapon in public. In the end, Circuit Breaker sabotaged the weapon and tried to manipulate Blackrock into publicly joining with her in her revenge tour against not only the Decepticons, who indirectly were responsible for injuring her, but all Transformers. Lots of recap of stuff we already know here, really. Blackrock and Circuit Breaker's arguing was interrupted by Starscream and Frenzy, who were sent by Shockwave to destroy GB Blackrock's weapon. Jazz and Prowl joined the fight to try and fend off the Decepticons, which they were able to do, but Circuit Breaker turned her anger on them too, injuring them and, after BlackRock talked her out of destroying them altogether, destroying a mock-up Transformer that BlackRock had built before storming off, declaring that if he won't side with her, then she's going to do whatever it is she does next alone. Buster is about to say something, and he starts off with, "Well, Jazz, But then he realizes the time, and he says he promised his dad he'd deliver some Christmas presents for him, so he'd better get going. Jazz offers to drive Buster, and Buster says, "Great, I want to go to a small town just outside Portland." He continues over the page. It's called St. Petersburg. So remember the sign that Circuit Breaker was standing by earlier? Contrived? What? No, come on, it's just a coincidence. Yeah, it's contrived, come on. In snowy St. Petersburg, a bunch of kids are having a snowball fight, and in the middle of it, someone randomly says, "Not long now, gang," and someone says, "Yeah, soon be Christmas morning," with like an ellipsis afterwards. I don't know what's so amusing to me about this. I think it's just a combination of all of it, really. It's totally out of place in a snowball fight for them to be saying that. And it seems to imply that they're out very late at night waiting for Christmas morning. And the strange ellipses after "soon be Christmas morning." And then there's the fact that this dialogue adds and tells us nothing. Like, we just don't need it at all. I don't know. It just really amused me. Close by, Circuit Breaker, sans floppy hat now, is, for some reason, watching them. The same kid who spoke before continues, "Then we can open..." Yeah! And plunges into a hole in the ice, which we didn't know was there previously, so it seems like they're having a midnight snowball fight on top of a frozen body of water. At least 7 kids, from what I can count in the first panel. That's a really dangerous idea. From the first panel there, it looked like not even one of the kids' parents had thought to be there to supervise this. But we'll see in a moment that there is at least one dad there, which, I don't know, it just makes this worse really, because he's not only allowing this, but actively participating, with his adult body running on top of the ice with 7 children. It's extremely dangerous. There's a shot from under the water that shows the child crashing through the ice, and that's really nicely drawn actually. I really like that panel. The next panel is from outside the ice, showing the kid's horrified face, and it looks like they're screaming because there are air bubbles coming out. Their hair is kind of wild and messy from floating in the water, and their face is pressed up against the ice, unable to break through it. This might just be a personal thing because I swear I've had nightmares about exactly this. But that's just a horrific image to me of like being able to see somebody but not help them. Oh, ugh. What a roller coaster. I went from chuckling at this awkward dialogue to genuinely a little tiny bit disturbed within one page. Circuit Breaker sees all this and leaps into action, though she does it without her coat, which is so weird and mildly inappropriate. Why did she need to remove it to do this? And now she's wearing barely anything, surrounded by minors. Just bizarre behavior. So she leaps in, barely clothed, and in the background we can see a taller guy with a brown coat and one of those like hats with the floppy ear pieces, who thinks, "Who the heck?" And now that we've seen him here, look back up at the first panel. He's there on the ice playing in the snowball fights with the kids and making no effort to stop them going out on the ice. Like, what are you doing, man? It's one of those things that is almost certainly unintentional, but I just found this whole scene so funny. Circuit Breaker thinks that she needs to do something quickly, so she cracks open the ice using a yellow beam, which she shoots from her hand. Which, going by all prior evidence, should be electricity, right? So, A, why is that cracking up on the ice? And B, that is going to kill that child if she hits the water with it. And given the entire reason she became Circuit Breaker in the first place was that she herself was badly electrocuted. You'd think she'd be a bit more careful here. I don't know, I just found this so funny. I mentioned before that I want to read this with somebody who hasn't read it before, but you need the context of her powers and everything right first, so I guess I had to do like an explanation for them to get this, but just absolutely batshit. This is so funny to me. She manages to get the kid free though, and she tries to shake her out of the state that she's in, only to realize that it's too late. She appears to be dead. So, Merry Christmas! She says that her heart has stopped, and there's only one thing she can do, and that's shock a soaking wet child with electricity next to a frozen lake. I couldn't believe this was in here. Like, what the hell? I mean, fair enough, yeah, her heart has stopped, and so she's dead anyway. Unless Circuit Breaker, or that grown man who is there, but not helping, does something. But lungs full of water, like, has Circuit Breaker, with all her smarts as Josie, never heard of CPR? Whatever, it works though. and Circuit Breaker says that her heart is beating again, and she's going to be fine. Which is kind of wild. Even if her lungs did clear of the water, which we have no evidence that they did, she's still, wet. You know, she's been in the water. Hypothermia and shock are still a real worry at this point. And now, this grown man, who has watched her save a drowning child, throws, I don't know what it is, something at her. It looks like a bit of twig or a pipe or something. I can't tell. And he tells Circuit Breaker to leave the kid alone, and he calls her a weirdo, and asks, "What kind of monster are you?" This reaction is just baffling to me. She's just used her power, which isn't even hers really, it's all the suit, to save a life, and he's mad about it. A close-by child calls her a freak, and says that she bets Circuit Breaker melted the ice intentionally to cause the accident. That's a bonkers, baseless claim, right? I don't know where that idea even came from. Circuit Breaker says, but it's too late. The other kids start to join in, and they call her a freak and a monster. And she starts having, a minor mental breakdown. She's crying and covering her ears with her hands, and she shouts, "No, please, I..." Over the page, she says, "I'm human, like you. Or I was." Just to be clear, all these powers come from her suit. She has fully explained that to us, and to GB Blackrock in issue 9 of the US series. Circuit Breaker is still fully human. So this just adds another reason that this entire story is so weird. She says that the robots made her like this, which is also untrue. She designed and built this entire suit by herself. She has images of the monstrous version of Soundwave one more time in her mind, and she screams, "It's their fault! Their fault!" And she attacks the imagery, like the phantom Soundwave, which vanishes to reveal that she set light to a close-by tree. She thinks to herself that she needs to get out of this situation, so she flies away. And in one panel, we see her doing a superhero flying pose and taking off. And then in the next one, she's in this super weird posture with her legs quite wide apart and her arms splayed, thinking that she's finally getting some distance from those kids and that weird dad. Below her, wouldn't you know it, is Jazz carrying Buster, who's asking Jazz to slow down. Jazz has a record for this, actually. He's been spoken to for driving too fast before by GB Blackrock, and at that time he said slowing down wasn't his style. He's the same here too. He says Buster should relax because he always drives like this. Buster looks really frightened, and he's gripping Jazz's steering wheel and yelling about how it's raining outside, and if that rain freezes on top of the snow, but he can't even finish his warning about black ice because Jazz starts to skid, and he smashes into a mailbox before hitting, those convenient chest-high walls that used to be super common in video games about 10 or so years ago. Yeah, it's one of those. It's like a chest-high wall that's there for no reason at all. It's brick, and it's quite small. It seems to get mostly destroyed by the crash. But whatever it is enough to stop Jazz. So he transforms, flinging Buster into the air, and he yells, "By the primal program!" Which we just heard Optimus swearing upon at the end of the last issue, so that's interesting. Jazz doesn't even catch Buster. Who lands on his front in the snow, and he calls, "Buster! Buster, are you alright?" From above, Circuit Breaker sees this, and from up here, we can see Buster looking like he's semi-buried in the snowdrift, face down. She sees Jazz and Buster, and she's furious that once again a Transformer is hurting a human. And while it looks like this is supposed to be a kind of farcical misunderstanding, they did just crash, and he flew into the air, so I don't think she's technically even wrong. She accelerates her flight, and the panel turns red, and there's a yellow trail following behind her, and she yells, "Robot!" in a dramatic, angular speech bubble with yellow outlines on the font. Jazz looks up and says, "Who?" Circuit Breaker blasts him, and Jazz takes a hit so hard that he falls backwards, and he's on fire. Lots of fire going around this issue. And he screams, "Ah!" And at that moment, Buster, I guess, wakes up. It seems like he was out literally cold for a moment there, and he lifts his head up and groans, and Jazz calls the Circuit Breaker from his place, now also laying on the ground. He says he doesn't want to cause her any harm, but she doesn't let him finish, and yells out, "Ha!" before blasting him again. And this time, it's kind of fair, because even while Jazz was saying he didn't want to hurt her, he was pointing a gun directly at her, which she made explode when she fired on it. Buster gets into a crouch and says, "Ugh, my head." But Circuit Bowie isn't done pressing the attack. She looks like Ziggy Stardust again here, and she levitates close to Jazz, telling him that Buster is the last human he'll ever harm. Buster yells, "Circuit breaker, no!" His arms are raised, and he tells her that not all Transformers are as destructive as the one that caused her accident, and that he and Jazz are friends. He wasn't being attacked. Circuit breaker is too far gone, and has put too much time and thought into this revenge plot now, and she says that Jazz's kind brought their civil war to Earth, and for that, he deserves death. It's such a leap of everything, logic and sense and all kinds of things. Jazz had nothing to do with either of those incidents, but she's still mad. She still thinks that's justification in her mind for wanting to kill him. She's really gone off the rails, and her hatred for all Transformers is just never going to make logical sense, I don't think. We just have to accept that she hates all of them. Just unreasonable and nonsensical as that may be, that's just her villain story. Buster says, "Wait, listen." His watch shows midnight, which again is so funny, because those kids actually were having a snowball fight at 11-something p.m. at night. And Buster must have waited until long after 10, at least, to start delivering the presents like Sparkplug asked him to. He says, "Church bells! And the time! It's Christmas! It's Christmas Day!" And there's a peculiar panel of Circuit Breaker. It's all red again. And she's either, attempting some kind of erotic dance, or she's in some kind of pain. But whatever it is, she's in a really strange pose there, with her mouth open and her hands... It looks slightly like she's caressing her own chest in two very specific areas. Either Buster or Jazz says, "Merry Christmas, ma'am." This bizarre interaction in the middle of an argument is enough for Circuit Breaker to decide to give Jazz another chance, so he deserves to die, but not on Christmas Day. She flies away and says that Jazz has been given a second chance. What? I mean, she says that, there's something he needs to do, right? I have no idea what she's getting at here. But she says there won't be a third chance. She says, "Merry Christmas," and blasts off to go... we don't know. Be angry at robots somewhere by herself, I assume. Maybe she has some family to be getting back to. Who knows? She never put that coat and hat back on either. It looks like she abandoned those somewhere on the ice. Jazz says, "Buster, you saved me." Buster says, "Not me, Jazz. Christmas." Jazz opines that if it can do something like this, then Christmas must be a really special time on Earth. Buster and Jazz are looking out at us in the last panel, and Buster closes this whole bananas mess by saying, "Yes, it is special, Jazz. Very, very special." And that's the end. Yeah, I had so much fun reading that one. I just think it's absolutely batshit. It's all over the place. A lot of it is just recap, and then there's just bizarre sequences that they don't add up to me. This writer who wrote this really good, clever story about Megatron being this gladiator also wrote this absolute nonsense. It's wonderful. Yeah, this was so bad that I loved it. I hope you enjoyed that story as much as I did and found it as amusing as I did. It would be embarrassing to find I was the only one laughing quite so hard at this nonsense. But that's our episode for this week. I was slightly bad about that. But next week is a kind of bumper episode. It's going to be solo again, but it's Crisis of Command, which is a 3-part story, which means I can't really split it. If it's a 4-part story, I can easily split that into 2 episodes, right? But if it's 3, it kind of has to all be together. I can't do a 2-part and then a 1-part. Luckily, though, this one was quite short, so I have extra time to get that ready for next time. And I hope you'll join me again then. But until then, that's all from me this week. Thank you, as always, to my patrons, Mel and Corey, who both kicked me a couple of bucks this month. If you would like to support the show, you can head over to patreon.com/Transformers AutoBook Club and become an Auto Bestie or a Decepticon Padre by sponsoring the show for $3 a month minimum, though you can pick however much you want. Everyone who does gets a thank you on each episode of the show, and hopefully at some point in the very near future, access to a short monthly bonus episode covering a chapter a month of the Transformers manga that I've been meaning to read for ages. To hear about other comics I've been reading, you can find me on Blue Sky, which is at Clarion Comics JP. Or if you want to chat with me, previous guests, and some listeners too, you can join the Discord using this QR code or the link in the episode description. Other ways you can support the show are giving the show a review on your podcast platform of choice if you're a podcast listener, or if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, share the link around to your friends, comment, and of course subscribe. Those are all ways that you can help me out too. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, until next time, take care, be kind, and do good, till all are one.